my friends. And thank you so much for coming to spend part of your Sunday evening with me. Today's Sunday, April 21st of 2024, and I have an amazing guest for you tonight. This is really, really exciting for me, and I know that it's really exciting for you too, because all of you true crime fans and armchair detectives have likely been watching him on YouTube and on every single news channel for as many years as I have. And his opinion is so very well respected in his field. And I'm just really, really excited that he's here to join us. I could just pull up his bio because all of a sudden it disappeared on me. So give me 2 seconds. How is everybody doing today? This case is getting a little bit nutso. But I am really happy to have Joseph Scott Morgan here with me tonight. You may recall that the other night when we covered the Karen Read case, we played the clip from Banfield at the very end of the show. And I was so excited to hear his take on this case. And he tells me he's only really talked about it maybe 2 or 3 times. So we're very, very lucky to have him. If you are not familiar with Joseph Scott Morgan, he is the Distinguished Scholar of Applied Forensics at Jacksonville State University in Alabama. Joseph holds a Master of Forensic Sciences degree and is formerly a board-certified fellow of the American Board of Medico-Legal Death Investigators. He's the host of the podcast Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan, which was nominated for a Clue Award at CrimeCon 2022 in Las Vegas. He began his career in New Orleans, where he was one of the youngest coroner investigators in the United States. Following his tenure in Louisiana, where he was named senior investigator with the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office in Atlanta, Georgia. Oh, Fulton County. That's where Fonnie Willis is, right? She's the DA now. I covered that case with you guys. During his time in Atlanta, Joseph helped create and establish the national training guidelines for medico-legal death investigators. Eventually, the national guidelines would lead to the formation of the American Board of Medico-Legal Death Investigators. In 2013, Joseph Scott Morgan was named Georgia Author of the Year for his memoir entitled Blood Beneath My Feet, The Journey of a Southern Death Investigator. Joseph's memoir is currently in development as a television series. In 2021, Morgan starred in the Oxygen series Murdered and Missing in Montana, which explored the suspicious deaths of Indigenous women on Native American reservations in Montana. Joseph will be starring in the Oxygen docuseries based on the podcast, The Piketon Massacre, which is slated, I believe, to premiere soon, unless it already has. He's also been on just about every news channel and every true crime show that you can imagine. And for those of you who are going to CrimeCon, he will be speaking at CrimeCon, so you will see him there. So without any further ado, I welcome to our show, Joseph Scott Morgan.
Hey, y'all. How you doing?
Hello.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me, Melanie. It's
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
I don't think I'm a cupcake. So there you go.
Well, I say I'm not a cupcake because I can't make everyone happy.
That's an empirical impossibility.
And that's it. You know, I have 5 children. Nobody's ever happy all at the same time.
No one is ever happy.
And, you know, that's just the way it is. You know, everyone thinks I should be neutral. And, you know, it's kind of like my channel. If I have opinions, I'm going to share them. But sometimes I'm for the plaintiff. Sometimes I'm for the defense. Sometimes I'm for the prosecution. Sometimes I'm for the defendant. But what I always am for is, what does the evidence show?
Right.
What is the rule of law? And what does the Constitution say? Law, procedure, and evidence. And that's why I called you. Because as a trial lawyer, I hire experts to try my case. And you, my friend, are now the expert for us today in the Karen Read case. So at least we can try and make some sense of whether or not you think Officer John O'Keefe was hit by a car.
Okay.
You know, that's what we've been taking a look at. And I don't know. I'm going to pull up for a second so that we can look at it together. And then, you know, just give a little background to the people who are watching. We can read this together, and then you can just let us know what you think about it. This is the Commonwealth's version of events as filed in their appellate brief, but I thought it would be a good little synopsis for us to start with anyway. What the Commonwealth is alleging essentially is that in the early morning hours of January 29th of 2022, the defendant Karen Reed backed up her Lexus SUV into her boyfriend, police officer John O'Keefe, who was a pedestrian, and left the scene, allowing him or leaving him to die in the cold. Karen Reed's version of events is that she dropped Officer O'Keefe off at this home. She went home. He went inside. Something happened. He wound up on the front lawn. And the next morning, she goes back and finds him on the front lawn. So, according to the Commonwealth's versions of events, when they interviewed Katie McLaughlin, who was the Canton firefighter the next day, which was January 30th, Katie told them that approximately 6 a.m. on the 29th, Canton Fire and EMS had been dispatched to 34 Fairview Road for a male party in the snow and unresponsive. Upon arrival, Ms. McLaughlin observed the victim to have trauma to his face and eye area and vomit in his mouth. She observed the victim to be dressed in jeans, socks, and one black Nike sneaker. The victim's shirts were cut, and his chest exposed for chest compressions. Ms. McLaughlin had exited the ambulance to speak with the defendant as to the victim's identity and medical history. The defendant provided the victim's name and date of birth. Ms. McLaughlin asked the defendant if she knew where the victim had suffered the trauma to his face/eye, and the defendant turned to her friend and stated repeatedly, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him," in response to the paramedics' questions. Following the initial witness interviews on January 29th, Troopers Buchanan and Proctor then proceeded to the Good Samaritan to view the victim. They observed 6 bloodied lacerations varying in length on his right arm. And I sent you the autopsy photos, so you have them, right?
Yep.
The cuts extended from his forearm to his bicep. Both of the victim's eyes were swollen shut and black and blue in color. The troopers observed a cut to the right eyelid area of the victim. The victim's clothing, consisting of blue jeans, an orange t-shirt, long-sleeved gray shirt, and boxer shorts, were soaking wet and stained and saturated with blood and vomit. The victim was also observed to have one black Nike sneaker with a white Nike logo on the side. The victim's medical records were admitted as an exhibit before the grand jury in this matter as well. Throughout said medical records, the attending physician and medical personnel described the victim's injuries at length. Said description of his injuries and medical conditions include right superior orbital ridge region, approximately 7 millimeter laceration, positive, what looks like a plus sign to me, positive surrounding soft tissue swelling/contusion, positive breath sounds bilaterally, pulseless, positive superficial abrasions, right forearm. Time of death was noted at 7:50 a.m. And then they go on to say that on January 31st, which was 2 days post death, Dr. Irene Scorti-Bello from the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner conducted the autopsy of Mr. O'Keefe. The doctor advised the troopers that she observed several abrasions to the victim's right forearm, 2 swollen black eyes, a small cut above the right eye, a cut to the left side of his nose, and approximately 2-inch laceration to the back right of his head, and multiple skull fractures that resulted in bleeding of the brain. Dr. Scorti-Bello further advised the troopers that the victim's pancreas was a dark red color, indicating hypothermia was a contributing factor to his death. Dr. Scorti-Bello opined from her examination that the significant blunt force trauma injuries occurred prior to Mr. O'Keefe becoming hypothermic, as evidenced by the hemorrhaging in his pancreas and stomach. Mr. O'Keefe had arrived at the Good Samaritan Medical Center with a body temperature reading in the low 80s. The doctor opined that the extensive injuries to his head likely rendered Mr. O'Keefe incapacitated. The doctor further opined that upon viewing Mr. O'Keefe's injuries and her examination of the body, she observed no signs of Mr. O'Keefe being involved in any type of altercation, physical altercation, or fight. In addition, the doctor testified that the victim had abrasions on his right arm. She described abrasions as scratches caused by a blunt object or contact with a blunt object. She also went on to describe them as a cluster of them on his right upper arm, on his right forearm, mostly linear, ranging in size from a few millimeters to up to 7 centimeters. Dr. Scorti-Bello testified that throughout her thorough external examination of the victim's body, she observed no signs of an altercation or fight. Doctor also testified extensively to the injuries or swelling of the victim's eyes. She testified that from her examination of the victim, both external and internal, that the bleeding and subsequent swelling around his eyes was related to the very small fractures in the skull. She testified specifically that the injury initiated or started in the back of the head, caused all the fractures in the skull, and then the eyes got red or black or purple because of the seepage of blood from the small blood vessels. The neuropathology report, completed by Dr. Renee Stonebridge, also of the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, and attached here too as an exhibit, are consistent with Dr. Scordi-Bello's findings. I just want to point out to the viewers that the defense adds to their responsive papers that she did not mention what they say are clear injuries to the back of both of his hands. And with that, I have so many questions.
Me too. Yeah, it's very dense material. Particularly when you don't have a narrative that explains everything that's going on here. Because one of the things that we look at in the medical legal world is, first off, in my world, the world of the coroner and the medical examiner, I much prefer examining a body and making my own assessment and this sounds so rote, but trying to understand what the body is telling me. Some people say, the body talks to you. To try to understand what evidence exists on the body, whether it be trauma that we see on the surface externally, what's going on internally. And I think in this case, which, I know that we'd like to get into, is this idea of the clothing. Because that's, when you think about a pedestrian struck by a vehicle, it is such a layered event. And I mean that both figuratively and literally. Because we see injuries where an individual is struck by a vehicle. I'm not interested initially in what's being demonstrated on the surface of the skin. I want to see the clothing to try to understand if there's any trace evidence that's there, and it needs to remain as pristine as possible. I don't want, as an investigator, anyone handling the clothing other than us. And one of the big problems that we've had for years and years is that, God bless, I know that we've probably got nurses in the audience. God bless nurses. I love nurses.
Mm-hmm.
They've saved my life a couple of times and my friends' lives. But their interest is not necessarily from an evidentiary standpoint. Their interest is try to save lives. So it sounds as though in this particular case that the clothing was not handled in a manner in which we would normally expect clothing to be handled, where we're going to be preserving evidence. And that fault does not necessarily rest so much, I think, with the clinicians as it does law enforcement, because there's a lot to be said for timeliness,
Right.
from the perspective of an investigation. Where does this investigation rest as far as the urgency, and how much, as from a law enforcement perspective, how much how invested are you in this investigation? Because if you were truly invested in this investigation, you would get there forthwith, and anything that's there that could give us information about this event, because now we're left with a situation where we don't necessarily have a witness, where we have a third party witness, perhaps. We've got a lot of opinion that's out there. We've got comments that are out there, but we don't necessarily have somebody eyeballing this. So the most important elements that we have are the clothing and the body.
Mm-hmm.
And if any of that stuff is compromised in any way, then your case might not be worth gunpowder to blow it to hell. at the end of the day because you've bespoiled it at that point in time.
Right.
So I would really take issue with anybody that did not uh, view that clothing particularly with the utmost urgency to get their hands on it and examine it.
Well, I will tell you what happened to the clothing. There are photographs in the hospital while Officer O'Keefe is in a hospital bed. The clothing is piled on the floor. And subsequent to that, the trooper Michael Proctor, who was the lead investigator from the Massachusetts State Police, took possession of the clothing but did not log it into evidence for several weeks, somewhere between 3 and 6 weeks. We're not exactly sure. So,
See, this is, I got to kind of stop you right
yeah,
now.
sure.
This is the first I'm hearing of this relative to the clothing.
Mhm.
As you know, I've been peripherally, following the case. But that in and of itself would be, um, how can I put it? If I were, say, for instance, if this was a case that was being handled by one of my investigators at a medical examiner's office or a coroner, that's something, that event alone relative to the clothing is something I would admonish my employee about from a supervisory standpoint, because that violates some of our basic tenets when it comes to preservation of evidence.
Right.
And I'm not being disrespectful when I say this, and please understand me and hear me right.
I'm
Um, when we talk about the body, okay, the body of anyone, and God bless Officer O'Keefe's family, but the body, in any case, is the biggest piece of evidence that we possess, okay, because it's going to tell the tale, and any of the accoutrements that come along with the body, clothing, jewelry, anything, is evidence. And so
Mhm.
that is to be handled with the utmost care. You can't be cavalier with it at all, because at the end of the day, uh, you're going to have fingers pointing back at you. If you once you walk into that courtroom, they're going to start asking you about procedure. How did you handle this? What due care did you take? How do we know? You talk. And this occurred. God, I hate to keep mentioning this guy, but the O.J. Simpson case,
Oh,
and we think about
yeah.
the blood evidence that one of the investigators carried around the trunk of their car. Um, that again is a violation of all of the tenets that we try to enforce to our people, that we're teaching them about forensic science and preservation of evidence and everything. And you're not going to log it in for that period of time. If that is accurate, then that goes to the heart of the case, because it's at that moment in time, if prosecution is putting forth this idea that the car struck him, okay, car struck him,
Yep.
there could potentially be evidence on the clothing. Well, if it's not logged in, that means you have nothing at
Yeah.
all,
Yeah.
period. Because if it's right around the back of your unit, I don't know what in the hell else you've been doing with your unit while you're riding around with evidence in it. It's
Right.
not in the chain. And you'd learn this as a
Sure.
first year law student about
Yeah.
the importance of
Chain
the
of
chain of
custody.
evidence,
Yeah.
accountability all the way
Uh-huh.
along. Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened was they did not even send the clothing. It took the defense at least 2 years to get their hands on the clothing to be able to test it, because the theory is that he was involved in a fight inside the house, beaten to a pulp, and then the family had a German Shepherd that they believe attacked his right forearm, and the defense believes that's what those injuries are. So the prosecution, something like in December of 2023, finally sent the clothing or the shirt to a canine veterinary forensic lab at UC Davis to
Mhm.
test it for canine DNA.
Right.
But by that time, I mean, maybe you can talk a little bit about whether any such evidence would still even exist or be valid or admissible. You were the expert in this case.
Well, it depends on how it's been treated during that period of time, right?
Yeah,
And we've already got an environment, which is a very wet environment, that this victim would have been in the snow. Of course, it's freezing outside, but it's wet, and um, unfortunately, particularly when you're talking about a molecular level like DNA, water uh, destroys a lot of things. It compromises cases many times. improperly storing something that's wet, for instance, if it's not treated with due care. So what was the status of the clothing when it wound up at this laboratory out in California for the veterinarian people to take a look at? And the fact that I'm sure that this UC Davis is a fun place, and uh, you're telling me that you had to send it all the way out there, that this could not have been walked through someplace in the Northeast that could have facilitated this for you. Uh, I don't understand that necessarily. And procedurally, I don't know what they did with it, how they went about the testing.
Right.
So I would, if I were a defense attorney and I were to be, presented with that, that's something I would probe extensively on the stand with certainly the police officer that collected it, the custodian of evidence, and then if they call in this person to testify in this case, I'd be fascinated to hear what they would have to say about the condition of the garment when they received it and exactly what kind of testing they did.
Right. We expect that they're going to come in and say there was no canine DNA found on the clothing, but the family German Shepherd that they had had for 7 years was mysteriously rehomed right around the time that people were testifying in front of the state grand jury, which they eventually upgraded the charges to murder in the second degree for Karen Reed after she was originally arraigned on vehicular manslaughter charges. So there's a lot of just very curious events that occurred during this time period. What they also did not do is take tissue samples from the arm. So no tissue samples could be tested by the defense to indicate what caused those injuries to his arm. Because when I look at those injuries, I see something that looks like an attack. Maybe you could explain to the viewers what the difference is between an abrasion and a laceration, because
Yeah, sure.
while it seems basic to us, I feel like I'm in the twilight zone when I read this report.
That's okay.
Mhm.
Let's talk about a laceration first off. Everybody that's kind of watching this right now, take your fingers like this and put them together. Not like you're praying, but just together like this so that your fingers are kind of bound, okay? And then slowly pull your fingers apart until they're in this position. This is representative, and this is something I do with my classes, that is referred to as tissue bridging. Now, what separates a laceration from a cut, okay, if we have a knife with a milled edge, what separates a laceration from a cut is that it's blunt force driven. So that means that if it's a hammer, if it's a car, if it's a rock, as that surface is impacted by that object, the skin literally tears. So you're not going to have uniformity to it. And with the tissue bridging, you'll still have little strands of connective tissue that are there because it doesn't do the job that, say, a butcher knife or a steak knife would do if you're thinking about wielding it over a steak or a piece of chicken that you're eating or whatever. It's going to leave these connected strands. And also, and probably most of the people in the audience have had a laceration at some point in time. If you've got kids, you've certainly dealt with lacerations because they crack their heads open and that sort of thing. And the scars or the injuries look very jagged. And a lot of that goes to the position of them. Our body has we surgeons operate on something basis the topography of the body called lines of Langer. And if you don't follow those lines when you make an incision, you get these really nasty scars. And so crime science doesn't work that way. It's not a uniform event. So you get these really nasty events that occur. And with lacerations, even more so. So you have these real jagged kind of interesting injuries that you have. And the other thing that you'll see with a laceration, such as what we're talking about with the back of the head, if the person survives, you'll have what's referred to, it's a fancy $10 word that doctors like to use. It means bruise, but ecchymosis is what they'll refer to it as, a contusion, ecchymosis, and you'll get associated swelling around that area. And that, again, it goes to that blunt force trauma that takes place where something slams into it, or if you're if you're knocked backwards and your head hits an object, the skin is going to respond. And again, that means that this is an antemortem injury if there's ecchymosis, as opposed to something that occurred after death. So you have this event that goes on where you have swelling that goes on and this sort of thing. And that's kind of fascinating. Now with abrasions, abrasion can follow or precede a laceration, and abrasions, very simply put, are generated by friction on the skin. So if you have, again, back to the example of a hammer, baseball bat, or car bumper, it doesn't matter. You can get an overlying abraded area where you get this kind of rubbing that goes on. And if 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 there is not sufficient energy to break the skin even further, then you're not going to have a laceration, but you'll see the epidermis and the dermis, which is the layer just below it. You'll see it kind of peeled back and abraded. It'll have uh, little features in it where the substrate is kind of torn in there, but it's not enough to get down into like the subcu fat. So that goes into the entire assessment. An autopsy like this, such as with Officer O'Keefe, should take a protracted period of time to go over all of these injuries. When you're considering, first off, you don't know, and we talked about this a little bit, Melanie, how you're going to classify it. And the forensic pathologist had a hard time, I think, initially, trying to make a classification. I think they initially ruled this case as undetermined.
It still is. The death certificate says undetermined. Yeah.
And so just because the ME calls it undetermined doesn't necessarily mean that the prosecutor is going to fall in line with that. Mm-hmm. And what that says on the medical legal part, I'm just strictly talking about the medical examiner here. Please do not misconstrue what I'm saying. The medical examiner has not been provided with enough circumstantial evidence for them in good faith to make a judgment that they're going to straight up call this a homicide. Now, when that individual gets on the stand, they're going to be asked questions like, well, doctor, in your experience, this kind of case, have you ever ruled a case with injuries like this as a homicide? Well, yeah, I have. Well, why didn't you rule this as a homicide? I don't have enough information that's being provided to me investigatively to make that next intellectual leap. Mm-hmm. That's what they're going to, that's the track they're going to take with this person. I don't know how much damage that's going to do to the case, or how much aid it's going to offer the defense.
The prosecution wants that redacted. They don't want the jury to see that it was an undetermined cause of death. So they don't want that, or manner of death, right? Manner of death.
Manner of death. Yeah, there's five manners. Yeah.
Right. I know this. Wait, homicide, suicide, accidental, natural, undetermined.
There you go.
Pretty good, right?
That's it. I'm impressed down to my core.
Oh, thank you. How long would you expect an autopsy report of this nature to be? How many pages? Just
depends on how. A lot of it depends on how anal retentive the forensic pathologist is. Some of them go into a very exacting detail, down to a microscopic level many times. Sometimes I think all of us have looked at reports over the course of our life where, we'll say, couldn't you have just put this more simply? But, but there are other times where I'm like, and I'll be sent autopsy reports to take a look at before I go on some show or something somewhere, and I'll look at it and I'll say, where's the rest of this? I don't have enough information here. How did they arrive at this conclusion? Because it's not demonstrated out, in the narrative that they generated.
We have not seen, obviously, the autopsy report. That has not been released, but we have been told that it's 100 pages long. So I just didn't know if that was.
That's a voluminous report. Now, that's probably going to include, because you had mentioned neuropathology.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to have the gross anatomical assessment. That is when you hear the term in the medical legal circles where they say gross anatomical dissection or examination, that means with the unaided eye. So what they're seeing physically at the autopsy table, external injuries, internal injuries, organ weights, status of organs. If they're going through the heart and they're looking to see how much occlusion is in the coronary vessels, condition. You mentioned the hypothermic response in the pancreas, which is pretty fascinating. That's a hemorrhagic response that you
Yeah, I
see.
want to ask you about that too, what that
Yeah.
indicates to you.
Well, it's traditional. It does. It's indicative of hypothermic response. And you can have inflammation with pancreatitis, but that brings us to the next section of the autopsy report, which is microscopic or histological. So when you get the gross anatomical examination, which 100 pages is really, really long. Then they'll do the gross, and then they're going to do the histological examination, which, one of the reasons we do autopsies is to take little sections of the organs, and they'll be prepared in paraffin, and they're sliced, and then they're placed onto a microscopic slide, and the forensic pathologist will sit there and look for anything, at a cellular level that they can appreciate any kind of disease or, any kind of trauma related changes in the tissue. Then you have the tox. Okay. So the tox will be thrown in there as well, which I
Joe,
think
don't be afraid to dumb it down. Don't be afraid to dumb it down. I know you're used to lecturing to students who understand all the terminology, but it's okay.
actually,
So
actually, your fans are probably far more attentive than my students are most of the time. Well, when you come,
Well, I just wanted to clarify that ante-mortem means before
yeah,
death.
ante-mortem means before death,
Right, okay.
and then post-mortem, and then perimortem means in the throes of. So you'll have these three stages. You can have somebody bleeding out, losing consciousness. That's generally going to be a perimortem event. Okay, or if they're exposed, if it's a hypothermic event, as they're starting to get shocky and they're going into that kind of twilight phase, that's a perimortem event. And then postmortem obviously is after death. And so you have those three phases.
Okay. So another question I have for you is, so what you observe, I'm not going to show the autopsy photos because I'll be stricken from YouTube and I'll get in trouble, but everyone pretty much has seen the photos. They're out there. You can find them if you'd like to find them. Would you describe the injuries to Officer O'Keefe's right forearm as lacerations or abrasions?
Those are abrasions.
Those are abrasions?
Yeah, I would call those abrasions. I can't. The problem with this relative to these injuries is that I cannot appreciate depth. So I don't know how deeply they're going, if they're getting into, because they're rather dried when I'm taking a look at them. As a matter of fact, and this is not what these are. Okay, please don't misconstrue this. I probably ought not even say this, but you can actually have ant bites that look, that will, particularly the tinier ones, where that top layer of skin has kind of gone away, and you have this drying event that takes place where the tissue is no longer glistening. So this image is taken for a period of time after death. I would imagine, just looking at this and considering the nature of what happened, this person has been in a cooler, more cooler perhaps, for some time. And one of the things that happens in the morgue, when bodies sit in there in the cold actually, uh, it actually dehydrates wounds many times. So it'll have that kind of flat appearance to it. It won't have that kind of wet, glistening, kind of clinical thing that you see if you're in an emergency room, for instance.
Right. So I'm looking at the one, or do you have the photos pulled up on your screen? So there's
I
two
do.
on the
Yeah.
bottom. The one on the left has those two large linear type scratches toward the upper bicep. And then if you look at the picture to the right of that, do you see where there's like a large lump on the arm? It looks like below the shoulder, below that I don't know what that is. Do you have any
Oh, on
idea?
the posterior aspect, yeah, that does look it does look a bit swollen. Again, not seeing this in person, fresh, if you will.
Right.
I don't know if that's the position of the body and also if something is pressing out the flesh. But yeah, I see what you're talking about. It's almost um, it's about the
Like
size of an egg,
right, like a
I guess.
dislocated shoulder. I mean, it looks like
That's a little too low
or
for
a
that. But if there is
torn bicep.
some kind of, yeah, well, perhaps. And again, in order to get swelling, that would mean that this would be obviously an antemortem event, and that the person would have had to have lingered for a bit in order to have this kind of swelling that sets in. And this could also be because I'm seeing postmortem lividity here. If you notice where the skin is kind of purple in color
Mhm.
there, it's kind
Yep.
of faintly livid. Um, that could be postmortem settling of blood in that particular area. But I'd be one of the things that happens, and we can talk about this with the hands as well. And forgive me, I don't mean to be grotesque or anything, but
No, no. I was gonna ask you
um,
about the hands because they appear to be clenched, almost like they're frozen like
mhm.
this in these photos, and I don't know if that indicates anything to you.
Well, what what I would hope to see in this 100+ page autopsy report is that they did a dissection of all of these insults. And the reason that's important is because you can go and maybe they did, depending upon what the assessment is of these injuries. If they're kind of vacillating between laceration and abrasion, uh, the top the top injuries in that same referenced photo that you're seeing there, those kind of it's bilinear. It's the biggest one. Wait, let me go back over here to this one and take a look. Yeah, it's probably the most pronounced, the one closest to the apex of the shoulder there.
Mhm.
Uh, the bottom one could in fact be a laceration, I suppose. It looks like it darkens up toward about the 6 o'clock position. That could be an indication that the tissue has literally been ripped there. But again, um, hopefully this forensic pathologist did a dissection of the injuries themselves, these little insults, these abraded laceration areas that she's talking about here, and also the backs of the hands would be dissected as well. Because I did, when I saw, um, I think, I guess it was, I was on Ashley Banfield's show the other day, and one of the producers contacted me. They called me at the last minute and asked me, and I had not heard anything about the contusions on the backs of the hands. I was like, wow, that's really interesting. Um, so what I would hope that they did was uh, do the dissection on both hands. You would need to cut down through the middle of it, take a look at it, and see how extensive those were. Um, and another thing that I would also want to know is what type of steps were taken on the part of the. I was trying to understand, just looking at, because this is the first time I've actually seen the photos of the hands, um, and they're rather diffuse. These injuries on the back of the hands. I would like to know if they had attempted to try to start an IV there. Generally, if they're running a code, they're not going to go into the backs of the hands. They're going to go into the left and the right crook of the arms. They'll refer physicians, and in the autopsy room they refer to it as the left and right ACF, which is antecubital fossa. And many times they'll go in and try to drop a line into the subclave right here, which is right beneath the um, uh, the clavicle. Um, I do see he's been intubated. That means he has a tube
Mhm.
indwelling
Yeah.
and a neck brace on. So they were trying to stabilize him. He does have these bilateral blackened eyes, which again is an indication. I was listening when you were kind of reading through that brief or the response. I'm sorry,
Mhm.
forgive me. I'm not good with legalese, but but the bilateral eyes, we call those raccoon eyes. That is that's indicative of basilar skull fracture. I would imagine that when the brain was taken out, he's probably got a fracture that kind of runs along the floor of the skull. It's eggshell thin, and that goes to a very specific forceful impact. And they talked about small. You had mentioned small. I think your wording was small fractures. I don't know if that's external on the exterior of the skull. Sometimes when they say that, and again, this is a legal document that's being written, it's not being written by the physician.
Right.
It could indicate that there's tiny little fractures on the floor of the skull. And again, you need the autopsy report in order to really be able to appreciate what the forensic pathologist said. Sorry,
Absolutely.
it's rather verbose.
No,
I'm kind
no,
of
I,
winging. I'm
I'm
kind of winging this right now, so my apologies.
no, I have so many questions, so that's good.
Oh, I also say it looks like, I don't know this for a fact, he's got nose trauma. I know you said that he had a tiny laceration there. And again, this is not the best shot. There's another shot that they would have taken that's called a slab shot, which means it's straight on, like hopefully they did.
Right.
I don't know if his nose is deviated to one side or the other. That has classic signs of a fractured nose, though, just
Uh,
looking at it.
I mean, I look at this and it looks to me like somebody was punched in the face. Like, does he have a fractured nose? Would a fractured nose be classified as a skull fracture, or would that be
Yeah, it's part of the skull. And so,
so? When they
yeah, so
say he
you
had
can,
many skull fractures, that also
yeah, but you can have
include a nasal
many
fracture?
skull fractures, and it can be generated by a single event as well. So you got to keep that in mind too, depending
Mhm.
upon the amount of force that's applied. Uh, you know, just a quick example, stays away from cars. Let's say if somebody falls off of a building, which that the velocity you could attain falling off of, say, a 3-story building, you land on your face, might be equivocal to a car impact. You could have multiple little fractures as a result of that you're not necessarily going to see externally. They might be all internal along the floor of the skull, because the floor of our skull, I don't think I don't think people fully appreciate how fragile it is. It's eggshell thin in a couple of places. So, like for instance, if you ever see anybody that's had like a nose job done, they come out and they've got raccoon eyes, and that's because the bone has been fractured in there. They're trying to, change things around, and people will get this swelling of the eyes. Sometimes people's eyes will be completely shut,
Right.
swollen shut. So yeah.
That laceration, I don't know if we're gonna call it a laceration that we see to the back of his head, and they have a what looks like a little ruler in front of it. You see the measuring
Oh yeah. Yeah.
device there? It looks to me like is that centimeters or inches, do you think, that ruler?
That's going to be centimeters at the top and then inches
Okay.
below. Yeah. So that's
Um,
normal. It's got a grayscale on it. Yep.
would that bleed a lot?
Yeah, it can. The head is very vascular. So uh, that's why it's very important to do x-rays. Um, in this case, it's also why it's very important. Let me get back to the x-rays. I got a little
Sure.
confused there. Just give me a second. So yeah, you would need to do a very thorough search of any location that this individual had been in, whether it is in the yard or, uh, they're saying that he was in the house. Uh, my thought is that this is not going to lead to internal bleeding, because the scalp is so vascular anyway. If that's clipped in any way, you're going to have um, quite a bit of blood that's there. I'd like to know what the back of that shirt looked like,
Mhm.
the kind of gravitational pooling of the blood, and going down the back of his neck, because gravity is going to pull it away. Or if he remained like in an upright position for any period of time, blood would pour from this. Okay, provided that looks like that was probably, again, can't say necessarily completely sure relative to these photographs that that's an antemortem event. It does look like it's antemortem before death. Um, but yeah, there should be, I don't know if it's copious amount, but there should be be blood, at the scene or in the home or somewhere?
So I will tell you that they did not search inside the home at all. There was no search done inside the home. I will tell you that they found 6 drops of blood in the snow that they
Mhm.
collected in red Solo cups that they borrowed from a neighbor. That's what law enforcement did as far as the first initial scene investigation by the Canton Police Department. In addition to finding the 6 drops of blood that they collected in Solo cups, they found some pieces of a clear drinking glass, which they bagged into evidence, and they also borrowed a leaf blower from a neighbor to blow around the layers of snow. There was about 2 inches on the snow at the time that Officer O'Keefe's body was found, to try and search for other evidence. I have questions. I have questions about the collection of blood into Solo cups, about what you would do as an investigator with regard to those pieces of drinking glass. Would you test them for DNA and fingerprints? Would that be something that would
That would
be a
be
pro
just
forma
that's just
obvious?
one of the tests that would be conducted, particularly when
Mhm,
you're talking about fractured glass. Um, I'd be interested in sourcing of the glass as
mhm,
far as from a manufacturer standpoint, because again, this goes to uh, validity, the point of origin of that glass. Where did it come from? Who possessed it? Is it something that belonged to him? Did it belong to someone in the house? Did it belong to, I don't know, a local bar? I have no idea.
right,
So yeah,
right,
I'd want to know that. And then yeah, so for fingerprinting, and for certainly for DNA. And again, it would be very delicate. It's something that you would only want to have uh, your top people, or say top people, your trained people to be able to collect it and then take it to the appropriate people to assess it. You see, here's the problem. I think, at least, you start throwing around things like Solo cups and
mhm,
talking about Solo cups and this sort of thing. Um, there's a reason that in hospitals they use things that are sealed. All right, because you want to guarantee that it's not contaminated if you're going to be treated with it. We apply the same reasoning to collection of items at a scene. Uh, you, it's important that you understand that anything that that vessel had come in contact with prior to that, somebody's saliva, I can't attest to the provenance of that cup. No one
right,
can.
right,
And I think that you would be a fool for using it because you're opening up Pandora's box. So let's just say that this is uh, uh, pedestrian versus motor vehicle. Well, um, you're collecting evidence, blood evidence, biological evidence, and you're using something that is not what is up to put it in this standard. It's not up to industry standard, and it won't hold up on the stand. So, the defense can look at this and say, well, and they'll have the person on the stand that used the cup to collect it. And the person on the stand is going to say something like, well, time was of the essence. And we had to collect this as soon as we could because we were afraid of losing it.
right,
So you don't have an evidence technician that has a properly equipped evidence van that's going to come out, and a person that has been trained, hopefully by the state of Massachusetts, to do this. I mean, there's training available everywhere. We know what the standards are. Why are you not doing it in this manner? Why are you relying on Solo cups?
mhm,
It doesn't, and look, I've been out on scenes. I've had to mark evidence with a cup before, a
right,
coffee cup perhaps, but I wasn't recovering evidence with a coffee cup. I was merely marking it. It might be numbered. I've I've been out on scenes before where we had so many spent projectiles, we ran out of the little yellow tents. We
hmm,
had to resort to cups.
wow,
And so, but I'm not collecting those items. And the
right,
fact that they would do that, you can't testify to how intact that thing was or how free that it may have been of any other kind of contamination. It's very foolhardy.
yeah. Another question that I have for you is, I found it odd, having litigated many, many cases in my life with, in my career with medical records and experts on the stand, and that the medical examiner wrote in the autopsy report that she saw no signs of a physical altercation or fight. I don't know why that would be in the report to say what did not happen. What I also do not see in the report, or they've never mentioned in the report, is that these injuries are consistent with a pedestrian versus car motor vehicle accident.
Hmm.
So I'm just wondering if it is standard procedure to put a sentence in like that. She observed no signs of an
It it
altercation
would
or
it
fight.
would it would need I think that if you were to make a statement like that, you would also need to make you would have to have kind of a, maybe a preamble to that to say that according to the police, there was an altercation, okay, that and generally, when you read what's gonna be the tail of the tape here is when you read this autopsy report, it's going to have a very large paragraph, an opening paragraph before they get into uh, the report proper. It's going to talk about who attended the autopsy and
Well, let me
who
ask you
was
that too, because two of the state troopers were in the room while the autopsy was performed. So that is, I would say, common, or is it not common?
Yeah, well, hopefully it is.
Okay.
We we try to encourage all law enforcement personnel that are involved in the case to come to the autopsy because they have a different perspective that no one else will have. But that should not their presence or absence should not dictate the crafting of a report. Uh, you know, at bottom line is you as a forensic scientist, you are to remain as objective as possible. And this applies certainly to, I think, at least in my field, the medical legal field, much more than any other. Okay, because um, you might have a criminalist that works for the state police. They work in the state crime lab. Medical examiner is an independent investigative agency. They're completely separate. Their investigators are separate. The pathologists are separate. They're not administrated by the state police. So they bring an objectivity to the case. And again, you guys probably don't want to hear this, but I'll go ahead and say it. I'm not a big fan of state medical examiners' offices being administered by the state police. Those
Right.
two things need to be separate. You go to New Mexico, Oklahoma, they're administered by the state health department because most of the deaths we deal with, uh, you know, you don't get homicides every single minute of the day. You get a lot of natural deaths,
Hmm.
and we work all of the homicides. But what I'm saying is, our purpose there is to give an objective rendering. Why she would include that sentence in there about the fight goes to a broader issue relative to the narrative that she's been provided with prior to walking into the autopsy suite. And you'd like to know what the source of that information was. Was it her investigator from the ME's office that had spoken with the police? Was this coming from the troopers that were standing there adjacent to the table? Uh, you know, I'd like to know, but I will say to this individual's credit, um, apparently they didn't allow this to influence them in the sense that they left the manner as undetermined.
Right. It just surprised me that it wouldn't say the injuries are consistent with the motor vehicle accident, but say something that they were not consistent with. I just thought that was sort of like
Yeah,
odd.
it is kind of odd. And back to the motor vehicle accident. One of the things that we commonly look for with pedestrian versus, and I talked to you about this off camera,
Yes.
Melanie, and that is one of the key things, and you can kind of file this away, future reference. And I know you've handled pedestrian versus motor vehicles in your practice. Um, the You look for something called bumper marks because that's the leading edge of the vehicle. It's going to make
Right.
contact, and what you see many times with bumper marks is you'll actually get an associated abraded area. Okay, now depending upon how much uh, force is applied, If you're uh, you can have the abraded areas. If you think about it in a band like this, okay, like a bumper, just think about your bumper on your car.
Mhm.
So you've got that body, that vehicular body moving through space, and they're going to strike a person. Most commonly, if a person is upright, you would look for it in the thighs and the shins. Very common. I've seen it on the lateral where the individual might sense, and I think probably everybody in the audience can identify with this. You see something as it's happening and you try to turn away from it at that moment in time, and you present, say for instance, pedestrians do this, they will present their outer thigh and you'll get struck in the hip, for
Mhm.
lack of a better term, or get struck in the side of the knee, and the person either is run over by the vehicle, which is a completely different set of injuries. Those are called rollover injuries. And then you have a set of injuries where someone is actually thrown over the top of the vehicle. And a lot of that is dependent upon the profile of the vehicle, how high or how low it is. And with bumper marks, whether it's the rear bumper or the front bumper, that's something you would kind of expect to see. And I've thought about this I was trying to think, how can you work out kind of the calculus with this, the dynamics of the event, if you're the prosecution and you're putting forth the idea that this is a pedestrian versus a vehicle,
Mhm. At a low
uh,
speed in reverse.
at a low speed in reverse, yes. So I would my thought was that you would, if the lower body is absent of so-called bumper marks, um, would the individual be crouched? Could Officer O'Keefe been crouched? Was he in a seated position, perhaps behind the car, and the car would go backwards? And how much speed can you build up in the snow,
Right.
backing?
In a very
Um,
narrow street
yeah, in
with a
what
curve.
they're saying is uh, blizzard-like conditions. I've heard that term applied over and over again. And look, you can hear from my voice, I ain't from around those parts, so we don't. And
Well, it wasn't
one of
blizzard-like at
my
that time. It was a
well,
light dusting of snow at the time.
one of my buddies many years ago that moved down from New Jersey, he said, you've never felt the kind of fear that you can fear until you have Billy Bob coming at you sideways in a pickup truck in an ice storm. And he's absolutely right. My people do not need to be out driving. But I keep hearing this term, blizzard-like conditions. Well, that implies to me that it's like a whiteout. I think you guys call it up north.
But
Maybe
not
it's a
during
whiteout. You don't have a lot of visibility, that sort of thing. So I
not
don't
at the
know.
time of the collision. That was the next day.
Right, and so
So,
it had knocked
light
down. I
dusting.
mean, it was light dusting. So, but even what would your visibility be like? Would there be any kind of fog? But that's beside the point. When you start
Mhm.
to think about the transfer of the energy from the vehicle to the person, where was that initial contact made? And I promise you this: the prosecution or the defense, either one, is going to ask that forensic pathologist. And if you're a trial watcher, and hopefully they're going to have this thing broadcast, I don't
Oh, yeah.
know.
No, it's starting
Um,
this week. We're here for it.
I appear on Law and Crime all the time. I do Law and Crime and Court TV, but Law and Crime in particular, uh, I I would be riveted to the testimony of the ME, in this case, the forensic pathologist, to hear what what she would have to say, and also any of the technicians that were involved in collection of evidence, and their solo cup theories. I'd love to hear this.
Well, it gets even
So
better. This is a question I had for you too. So thanks, Mindy, for asking, and thanks for being a member for too much. Mindy says the core body temperature of 80. Does that make sense with the Commonwealth timeline? And then Delia, thank you so much for your super chat. First, that you've heard of the clothing. Yes, because you have not been following this case. You've been following Koberger forever.
mm,
80-degree body temperature. Experts know what his temperature should be in that weather. Police were there during the medical exam commenting, right? We know that. So does the fact that they say his body temperature was 80 degrees at the time that he was found indicate to you how long he had been outside in the cold?
It can, and again, body temperature is highly uh, uh, is heavily dependent upon the environment. I think people believe that we're cocooned and that uh, our body temp is going to change at a predictable rate. That's a lie.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and I like to think about how, first off, how did they arrive at that number? Did the medical staff do a core body temperature on him in the emergency room? That's a
I
question I have.
I think they were saying that they did it on scene.
If they did it on scene, I'd like to know how they arrived at that number. What
Mhm.
methodology did they employ as from a clinical standpoint? Did they point a camera at him? I mean, a thermometer at him, like you would in a room? How did they actually get a core body temperature? Because in our world of medical legal death investigation, in order to get a core body temperature,
Mhm.
it's an invasive event. Okay, you're going to have to go into, and generally what they say is, uh, um, the liver,
They're
which,
saying sorry, 80-degree temperature, the core body temperature, I think was at the hospital. I think that you were right on that.
yeah. So, uh, and that would be after he had been undergoing treatment in the field and then back at the hospital. 80 is significant. If I was out on a scene and I got an 80-degree core body, well, this is the formula that's commonly used, and this is why I'm not a big fan of body temperatures and postmortem assessment. I'm more of a fan of postmortem lividity, which is the settling of blood.
Mhm.
But with so for the first hour after death, you can lose from 2 to 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit off of your body temperature. So we're at 98.6, right? You
Mhm.
lose a degree of temperature for every hour after death up until the 12th hour. But that's under ideal conditions. And of course, we all know that none of us that work in forensics, particularly those of us out in the field, there's not a single damn one of us that work under ideal conditions. So these studies were conducted at a static 72 degrees. That's
Mhm.
why, I have a real hard time, trying to understand this. Um, and I'd like to know how they arrived at that temperature. Very simply put, I'd
Mhm.
like to know how they did that. How
Yeah,
did they do that?
it just says that, Mr. O'Keefe had arrived at the Good Samaritan Medical Center with a body temperature reading in the low 80s. It was about 18 degrees outside, and he arrived at the hospital sometime before 7 AM. They didn't pronounce him until 7:50 AM. Is it required to warm the body before you can pronounce? Do you think, because when I read that earlier to you, it said
Hey guys, is it just us? And snowing. Any mention of frostbite?
take over the show because sometimes I swipe myself out and
Oh, that's okay.
show unless I do that. It said to me, I read positive breath sounds, and so to me, I'm not a doctor, I'm just a lawyer. What does that mean? Positive breath sounds bilaterally.
Yeah, well, it sounds as though that they have stethoscope and they were listening to the lungs. But if he was, uh, if he was flatline when he came rolling in, I don't know. I don't know
Yeah, I
what
don't
to
know.
make of that. I have no idea.
Do you, if someone's hypothermic, is it required that you warm the body up before you can pronounce someone deceased?
No,
Never heard that. Okay,
no.
I never heard that either.
Warming the body is something that's done in a clinical environment in order to bring them back from the edge. That's not something. As a matter of fact, we would prefer uh, no one touch the body after pronouncement period, and there's no need to warm the body in a postmortem state. Don't touch the body, leave the body alone. It goes back to my original supposition that the body is the biggest piece of evidence that we have.
Right.
I don't want any clinician I don't want any police officer, anybody touching the body at that point in time. It's up to us to do the assessment at that point in time, and also to get to the body as quickly as we possibly can. I don't want bodies fingerprinted. I don't want them collecting any evidence off of the body in the emergency room, tape lifts or anything like that. Let us handle that. Let us secure the body, bring the body back to the morgue. I think that what would really be, and somebody had mentioned, I see somebody just put up intubation. And so if they've got an ambu bag, which they would have, I'm looking at the image right now because they did have him intubated, they'd be forcing air into his lungs. So that's probably where the breath sounds or the lung sounds are coming from.
Mm-hmm.
So after they have called the code and they have pronounced him dead, and keep in mind, just so I like to throw these tidbits out. Time of pronouncement and time of death are two separate things. Time of pronouncement is a legal term.
Mm-hmm.
That means that, you're
Right.
dead by
Right.
law. That's not the time of death. Time of death is an assessment that is done scientifically.
Okay.
Or, and say what you will about it, the validity, because it's
Right.
not hard science most of the time. People like to think that it is.
It
So,
says time of death is noted at 7:50 a.m.
mm-hmm. So if they're going to call this, and pronouncement and time of death translates for the clinician translates into pronouncement, that doesn't mean that anything that we would do from the medical legal perspective that we're going to abide by that. We would do our own separate assessment relative to that. And that's the timeline is very important here in regards to Officer O'Keefe's death, right?
Yeah.
Because you've got all these little points
Right.
along the continuum where you've got this one saying this and this one saying that. So you want to try to marry these things up time-wise. Time is the coin of the realm when it comes to medical legal death investigation. It's what everything is based upon. In addition to that, we do injury assessments and all those sorts of things. So it's it's very, very important that we try to understand how long he had been down when the EMTs got to him. I think the first officer showed up. I remember reading this one portion that they had gotten out their defibrillator, I think, at one point in time, but EMS had rolled up and then they took over the scene at that point in time.
The theory is that he had, based on when they say that Karen hit him and they responded to him approximately 5.5 hours in something like 13-degree temperatures. Would you expect with the injuries that you saw in the photographs and the injuries that we've described, for him to still be actively bleeding? Because she went and gave him mouth to mouth and she was covered in blood. They also found vomit in his mouth, it said, and they also found vomit in his boxer shorts.
That's going to connect back to this head injury that he sustained. If they're doing chest compressions on him, hang on one second. Let me look at this photograph one more time, see if I see any evidence of this, and see if I can expand this a little bit more.
And also, I'm curious about what a neuropathology report encompasses.
Yeah, that's going to be the dissection of the brain.
Oh, okay.
So with what can happen many times if they're doing chest compressions on him, which it sounds like they were, it would not in mouth to mouth, I think that they mentioned. If you're doing chest compressions, if he's got, and they mentioned vomitus already, if the floor of the skull is fractured and you've got blood coming out of the nose, which if you're doing compressions like that, it will force blood out onto you. And I've seen people that are covered in blood that I've interviewed, at a scene when they were the first person to kind of arrive
Right.
at the scene of the event. So yeah, I think that would be easily explained, but does it mean that he was actively bleeding?
Right.
Because to have blood pressed out of your body is by a mechanical action,
Right.
chest compressions. It's completely different than him spontaneous or not spontaneously, but him bleeding as a result of an insult to his head.
When I look at that, if you're on the autopsy photos again, the one on the upper right, I mean, it looks like fresh blood on the pillow behind him. I was confused about that as well.
Yeah, that can be accounted for relative to seepage. And it looks like he's been rolled over. We're visualizing this from the rear posteriorly, which we have this image with a scale in it that gives us an indication that what they call this, Melanie? They say it was a 2 centimeter,
They
two
said
centimeter
2 inch, I thought they said.
laceration,
Let's
or
see.
2 inch.
7 right superior orbital ridge region. No, that's on the face, right?
Yeah, so this
7
should be
millimeter
right
laceration.
parietal or right occipital, I think, looking at this. I am happy to see that they shaved the wound. Sometimes these people will do an autopsy without shaving the wound. You can see that there's ecchymosis with this laceration on the back of the head. That means that it's swollen. If
Yeah.
this had been a postmortem event, you wouldn't see that. And the blood that you're seeing, that drainage that you're seeing down there, that can be seepage the from the insult on the back of his head. It's gravitationally dependent. The head's really congested, so it'll be pulled out through there. Or it could be where they're manipulating the body back and forth. I don't mean manipulating in a negative connotation. You have to move bodies back and forth. So if you still have residual blood in the airway, in the mouth and nose, you'll see it kind of seep out like that. It can get smeared around.
They're calling that a 2 inch laceration to the back right of his head, multiple skull fractures that resulted in bleeding of the brain. The fact that the pancreas was a dark red color, that indicates hypothermia too, but there are a lot of people who are saying, also it says here, as evidenced by hemorrhaging in his pancreas and stomach. Is that something that's caused by blunt force trauma, such as being hit by a car? In a certain portion of your
Yeah. You could sustain any of the internal viscera. You can sustain these hemorrhagic events. What they would have done, though, is that they're not simply basing this upon their assessment grossly, as I'd mentioned earlier, where they're just looking at the body with the unaided eye. They're doing that histologically. They would have taken sections of the pancreas, put it on a slide, taken a look at it, and the forensic pathologist can make that assessment, that diagnosis, microscopically, and see what's going on at cellular level. And there are changes that they appreciate relative to hypothermia. And the interesting thing about hypothermia hypothermia, forgive me, and hyperthermia is that many times those are diagnoses of exclusion. Many times you won't see evidence of it. It's more of a circumstantial kind of diagnosis. You're not going to see evidences in every single case. And sometimes the forensic pathologist will say, well, he's out there and he's alive and he was exposed to these temperatures. I don't really have enough to hang my hat on, but we'll go ahead and call it hypothermia. But that pancreatic response is something that I have, noted in the past in regards to cases with exposure to extreme cold.
How long does it take for hypothermia to set in?
You can begin to deep, and again, it's environmentally dependent upon. A lot of it's dependent upon how cold it is, and the individual's clothing as well. How layered are they? Because as you start to bleed off energy, when the shivering starts, like this, that's your body working to try to warm yourself up, but you're also burning energy and you're getting colder and colder. And I know it sounds like, daddy preaching to a kid, put a hat on when you go outside or put your gloves on, but there's a lot of truth in what mom says. When you're little, you're going to lose body heat very, very quickly. And so if you're not layered up in this kind of environment, it's going to set in really quick. You'll begin to see the first signs of this within about 45 minutes. And it's a slow, agonizing death. There's what happens is the individual eventually, I've had cases where I've had people that have become delusional almost. They'll be talking out of their head. You can have this undressing. It's called paradoxical undressing, which is fascinating, where people that are suffering from hypothermia will begin to take what clothes they have off.
Shannon
and it,
Gilbert.
yeah, yeah, and so you get these bizarre events that happen. And then eventually the individuals will slip off into a coma and eventually die. It's very unpleasant. It's a torturous kind of event.
Oh, that's horrible. Do you know who
Yeah, it is.
Dr. Frank Sheridan is? Ring a
Name
bell?
sounds familiar.
So he's the chief medical examiner for San Bernardino County, and he's the forensic pathologist that's been hired by the defense. And I just want to, for clarity, read in his opinion, which is that he opines to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that the injuries to Mr. O'Keefe's right upper arm, right elbow, and right forearm are not consistent with being struck by a motor vehicle, but are consistent with animal claw or scratch marks.
Hmm.
Notably, as detailed in and then they go on to say that again, the Albert German Shepherd was rehomed and had attacked other individuals, as in addition to, they say, attacking
Well,
Officer
I hope
O'Keefe.
that I think that that's all fine and good that they have
Mhm.
this individual. I'm hoping that they're going to have, if this is the direction they're going to go in, I'm hoping that they're going to have a vet that will testify as well. There are a number of forensic veterinarian practices that are out there. Um, Even the U.S. government has one. I think it's located. There's uh, a wildlife. See if I can get this. Maybe somebody in the audience will know this. There's a wildlife forensic lab that's located, I think, in Oregon, if I'm not mistaken. And I've even had veterinarians that want to come and take classes at my university, just to
Mhm.
learn more. There are a couple of veterinarians out there, believe it or not, where they still have elected coroners, where they are coroners in a
Wow.
particular jurisdiction. Yeah, there are even dentists that are out there that are elected coroner.
I know.
Uh,
We learned about that, and I think it was Murdoch, right? That the coroner is elected, and I think if it's Murdoch, I'm not sure, but I think that the coroner in whatever case I'm thinking of was actually a funeral director, and so
yeah, yeah, that happens. That happens a lot in Massachusetts. Uh, this is kind of one of the areas I study, and if you're in academia, you got to study something. So I study the coroner system. So, yeah, South Carolina has elected coroners, and it's they can't simply become a coroner without some level of education. So now they require them to have an associate's degree, and so yeah, and so in small rural areas, many times their default position for coroner is, oh, well, you're a funeral director, so you must understand everything about medical legal death investigation, and you've got a car that you can carry the bodies in, and so they
okay, you win.
automatically, yeah, they elect these people to be coroner. And some of them are fine coroners because no one else wants a job.
Yeah,
Who wants to deal with the things that you have to see and the paperwork and have to notify families and all that. It's
right.
heavy lift. So anyway, I digress. And it varies from state to state. Okay, depending upon what state you're in. No two systems are the same.
Would a typical medical examiner see a lot of dog bite type injuries on a decedent?
Uh, let's see. Well, I guess a lot of that is dependent upon your location. I've worked cases where I've had kids killed
Mm.
by dogs. It's horrible. It's absolutely one of the worst things I've ever seen. I wish I could erase it from my memory, but you can't. Um,
Let's see that.
I I I think that with the dynamic of this event that they're talking about on Officer O'Keefe's arm, so I can go back up here real quick. I'm going to have to bounce here in a minute, but
Sure. Yeah, I know. I don't want to keep you too much
no,
longer.
no, no, that's okay. I love being with you guys. It's
Oh,
great.
thank you.
Um, I I think my question is, uh, why only this area of the arm? Why are there not
Right.
also bite marks perhaps on the hands? Because as humans, we experience the world through our hands and we defend ourselves with the hands. Did Was this merely him throwing his arm up to block? And if that's the case, why did the dog stop? Why didn't the dog grab the back of his hand? Why don't we have bites on the hand? We have bruises on the hand, but those bruises don't necessarily look like something you would commonly see with a dog bite.
Does it look like something you would commonly see if somebody was in an altercation where they were punching someone?
The hands,
Yeah, or
not generally
defensive
on the
wounds?
back. I'd
Yeah, I mean,
have a
I thought
real
they were kinda high up, like, you'd see it on the knuckles, but as I sort of, like, zoom into the knuckles, I can see stuff there too. I also had a dog bite expert on the show who trains canine police dogs. It's a very
Mhm.
interesting show. I know you have 0 time in your life, but if you ever wanna go watch it,
Oh,
it's so
I'd love to.
interesting
Yeah, yeah.
because he actually has a prosthetic arm that he teaches canine dogs, and this is a washed out police dog,
Mhm,
to and what those dogs do, they will latch onto a perp's arm, and then the natural reaction of the person who's being attacked is to pull away, and then the dog's weight pulls them down, causing exactly those marks. He said, "Melanie, 100%. I have seen hundreds and thousands of dog attacks, and this is 100% a dog attack because the nature." And then he even said, "A lot of these marks that I see on the arm obviously happened when he was laying down because you can see where the teeth went in, and there's not always bite marks on the other side." It was a very interesting show. So he
yeah,
said to
and
me, "I probably
I
know
would
more about
welcome.
bite marks than an ME because they don't see a lot of dog attacks."
No,
I don't know.
we
True.
commonly don't, to a fatal, to the point of a fatality. When we get them, they are just absolutely over the top. I will tell you one of the injuries that kinda stands out to me in that vein is there is an insult just above the right elbow, and it's you've got these kind of what we refer to as curvilinear abrasions right here. They're real close side by side. They're direct. It's the injury that's directly below the two large ones that are by the bicep. This is lower,
Yep.
and then a smaller you've got a smaller area right here while I'm
Right.
pointing at it, like you can see what I'm talking about. But
Yep.
there's that could, I suppose, be viewed as maybe a mouth clenching. But here's
Like
here's the
incisors on the top and a bottom
mhm,
to like a
yeah,
shallow bite because it's on a trained dog. That's I mean, look, also another thing that I thought the difference between postmortem and antemortem bruising, if there is such a thing. But as I look at this right hand that is clenched, if I enlarge that, it kind of looks like a paw print bruise to me. I mean, tell me if I'm crazy, and I don't know if
yeah,
it's possible to
well,
bruise postmortem.
no, it's not. You don't
Okay,
bruise.
so
You don't. So you have to actively you have to break vessels, and then the blood has to be pumped into what's called the interstitial tissue. That's the area, the fatty tissue surrounding.
okay,
Um, here's the thing I think about these injuries to the right arm. Wouldn't it have been cool if they could have swapped those injuries, which is something that we
is it
do.
important to take tissue samples from an arm as such like this?
Well, yeah, it's important to have tissue samples, but it's really important to do swabs
Right.
because saliva is rich in DNA material, and again, it's fragile. If if they went in, they being the medical legal community, went into this case not knowing anything about dog bites or not knowing that these may, if you go in, you're predisposed to the idea that this is a motor vehicle accident. And by the way, I've seen injuries like this in motor vehicle accidents.
Mhm.
Where a car will, I talked about rollover injuries.
Yep.
Sometimes you'll get these kind of curvilinear events like this, these abraded areas where the underside of the car will scrape an individual. Um, but again, back to the swabs. If you go in predisposed to, okay, this is a car accident, that's what we're being told, no mention of a dog, then by the time they get the body, they've already probably washed the body down or wiped off anything that's on the body. And so you have to catch these injuries in the pristine state, or as pristine as possible, and swab this area, flush that area, collect that, and then submit it and see if there's any canine DNA in there.
It was never done.
Too late. Can't do it
Never
now.
done. It was
That's
never
not.
done.
Yeah, that's the other thing that I hope that they've done. They would have seen these bruises on the back of the hands if they did not dissect the hands, the dorsum of the hands. I'm hoping that they did X-rays because I want to know if there are any fractures.
Oh, they said
Um,
boxers fractures.
and so, do they have those? Are they going to be able to throw those radiographs up on a screen, on a limb, or whatever it is that they have in the courtroom, and say, okay, this is a fracture. They'll ask the doctor, is this consistent with someone, being pummeled or pummeling somebody else? Um, Also, X-rays of the skull. The cool thing about X-rays in court, and I'm going to have to bounce out after this, but
Yep.
the cool
I'll let
thing
you go.
about X-rays in court, and you know this as an attorney, is that when people in my field go to show photos, attorneys inevitably will say that those are prejudicial. They're so over the top. They're grotesque. All you need, that came up in Murdaugh, as a matter of fact. All you need is just a couple of photographs to demonstrate, because we don't want to prejudice the jury or whatever. The cool thing about radiographs is this: there's no blood, and if you're talking about
Right.
an extensive fracturing, you can point to this and say, "Hey, you know what? This is the extent of the fracturing." Now, they might not allow you to show after you have removed the brain and you take a look into what's called the cranial vault, and you see the little spiderweb fractures that are in there as a result of the floor being so thin and that impact injury, because it is rather visually insulting, particularly to, I mean, whoever impanels this jury, they didn't sign up for this. Okay,
Right.
they've been
Right.
summoned, and they're going to have to bear witness to this in court, and so there's part of that goes into it too. Are you capable as a jury member to look past the horror of this and understand clinically what the doctor is talking about? Or are you going to be so shocked by it that nothing else registers the rest of the day?
Right.
So there you go.
All right. Final thoughts. I know I've kept you for so long, and I thank you so much for coming. And I hope I would love for you to come back if you'd
Yeah,
be
sure.
open to that. Final thoughts. What do you make of this?
What I make of it is, part of me wishes I could have some of the practitioners in my classroom so that I could teach them about evidence collection, or some of my colleagues could. The whole solo cup thing really, has kind of taken me aback a bit. And uh, an absence of timeliness. The issue with clothing is quite striking to me, because it had never been logged in, and it was held. I think that's a major problem from an evidentiary standpoint.
Yeah. Well, we didn't even get into the fact that they didn't find the taillight pieces until 12 hours later, when another foot of snow had fallen and they were on top of the snow, the red taillight pieces. And
Right.
can a human body shatter a taillight? That's the theory.
Sure. Given if the vehicle is traveling at the necessary velocity in order to facilitate that,
Yeah, that would have to be pretty
it
high
can't
speed.
happen. I mean, I've seen lenses on, I've seen taillight lenses, and I've seen headlight lenses. With people embedded, having bits of the plastic. It's high impact plastic, by the way.
Mhm.
To have that embedded into the skin, you see all sorts of, manners of things like that out there at the scene, and to have it shattered, I'm hoping that those were, when they were collected, that they were effectively tested for any kind of DNA. I understand that it is being said, at least I can't
Mhm.
validate
Right. And
this
they're
in no way. I
saying
haven't. Go ahead.
microscopic pieces of the taillight in his clothing, but
Mm,
then there's photos of her car that just show a cracked tail. It's a very, very convoluted case, as you can see. I didn't want to overwhelm you all in one evening, but
that's okay.
when I look at this with all of my years of litigating accident cases and motor vehicle accident cases, these injuries do not look to me like they were caused by a low speed motor vehicle accident. So
Yeah, it's
I
true.
want
I
your
love what
opinion.
Tom. By the way, I love what Tom just said. By the way, Boston's one of my favorite towns, and
Oh.
he says, "Let me go back up here. You ever walk in a crosswalk in Boston? You're not a pedestrian. You're a target." So yeah, I love Boston. I love it. I'm a fool for it. I love going up there. But yeah, it's tragic. I mean, it truly is. I think that you don't need me to tell you that. It's horrible. I hate that this man died in such a manner.
Yeah,
I just hope that we can find the truth. That's what I'm interested in, the objective scientific truth,
right.
and bring this to some kind of conclusion one way or another.
Right. So, do you have reservations that it may have been from a low-speed motor vehicle accident? I'm not really getting an opinion.
Uh,
With a reasonable degree of medical certainty, doctor, what would your opinion be if called to testify on this case,
if
just
I
from what
if
we've looked at today?
uh, hmm, I don't know. I might come down as the medical examiner has come down. I don't know that I
Oh,
have enough information to
undetermined.
compute that. And particularly if you're saying that a fight took place in the house and
Well,
you
that's their
didn't
theory.
go into the house to examine that,
No. And they
the
ripped up the
dwelling.
basement flooring, they sold the house, they rehomed the dog. I mean, there's a lot of
Yeah,
circumstantial
I'd have
consciousness
a
guilt, people say,
I
perhaps.
I'd have a real issue with that because, that goes to the thoroughness of what you're doing. Listen, at the end of the day, you get one shot at it.
Right.
You can't go back. You lawyers love to use the term, you can't unring the bell.
No.
And once
Yeah.
you cross over the threshold at a crime scene for the first time, you can never cross that threshold for the first time again. That's
Mhm.
it. It's done with at that point in time, and it's over with. So, um, we'll see. We'll see how it all shakes out in the end. It's not up to us, is it? I
No,
mean, it's
it's
going to be
not.
up to those 12 people that are impaneled,
That's right.
and God bless them. They're going to have they're going to be on a hell of a trip for a couple of weeks, probably.
Oh, 7, 8 weeks, they say.
Yep.
Thank you so much for coming. I hope that you will come back. I know that
Absolutely.
everyone loved to see
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you
Thank
to all
you.
your fans. I really appreciate it. It's very kind of you to have me. I really appreciate it.
Are you kidding? This is like
Yeah.
my dream come true. All right. I
Hey,
linked your podcast down below. I'm going to say goodbye to everyone. You are now free to go. I know this was your third appearance today, so go be the TV star that you are. And everyone, go to CrimeCon and see Joseph Scott Morgan.
hey, if you listen on Apple to Body Bags, please give me a review on Body Bags. That's all I ask. And my podcast deals strictly with forensics, so anything that you can do in that realm, I'd really appreciate it, and I'm be most grateful, most grateful. So
Can you
thank you
come
very
back and
much.
talk about blood alcohol content and extrapolation and all that kind of stuff? Because I have so much more to talk to you about.
Yeah, sure. We could probably work that in at some point in time.
Okay, cool.
You
Thank
guys
you
have a good
so
evening.
much. Good
All
night.
right. God bless you guys. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Wasn't that amazing, you guys? I'm sorry I didn't get all your super chats and all of your comments, but I knew that he had limited time and I wanted to. I had a complete list of questions for him. So let me go to you guys now and see how you are all doing there. Gail Jean, thanks for becoming a new member. Wendy, thanks for your super sticker and saying excellent guest. 100%. He was an excellent guest. NDF, no skin in the game. He's got no skin in the game. Thanks for the $10 super chat. Money in advance for the chat. Chris Jarsons, I have a few things to say about, just kidding. I was like, you did. Thanks, Amy in Boston, for your super chat. You've been a JSM fan for years. Yeah, he's pretty amazing. I've been watching him for years too. Jimmy, thanks so much for your super chat. Big fan of Joseph Scott Morgan and Body Bags. Two awesome people tonight of whom I am big fans. Christy, enjoy. Thanks for being a member for 6 months. Scott, I did ask him this question for you. Can you ask why Wood and Emmy put in the autopsy that John wasn't the victim in assault, but still make it a copy? I thought we covered that pretty well. And I think that we can infer that if people were standing in the room, asking her to put that in the report, maybe she would have put that in the report. Oh, thanks, Kel, for being a member for 3 months and an amazing moderator. And Scott is also an amazing moderator and for loving all that I do. Stephanie, a lot of people say otherwise, but so thank you, Kel, for that. Stephanie, thanks for being a member for 4 months. And she says, excellent guest. I thought so. Thank you. I am anonymous now. Became a member. Congratulations. Della, thanks for your super chat. Dog trainer says these are dog bites. Bring that up. I think I did that, right? And maybe he'll go watch that show. Della, thanks again for another super chat. I'm kind of sad he doesn't know enough about the case, but respect. Point is, nobody did investigations. Inform him. Yes, and I think I did that. And I think it was better that he didn't know all about the case because he did not have any opinions formed yet. He had not seen the autopsy photos until today. And he had not read all of the things that we read in the documents with regard to what the medical examiner put in her report, the things that we know about, at least that are from the court documents. So I think that he was a great guest. Miss Bell, thank you so much for your super chat. Would an alcohol and blood loss affect body temp? I'm sorry that he ran off before we could get him to answer. Christy, thank you for the super sticker. You're very generous. Della, he speaks to an ideal world. Not ideal there. I don't think so. Lisa, thanks for the $5. Thanks, JSM. Excellent lesson on forensics and tact. We know you're just theorizing. Don't worry. Are you intrigued yet? I think he is. He really did not know. He's been so heavily involved in the Koberger case. And like I said, this was his third appearance today. So he's been very, very busy. and very heavily invested in the Koberger case. Ms. Mojo Horizon, thank you so much for your super sticker. And Mandolin Wind, I swiped myself. Thank you for the 10 spot. Something I would do. I'm cracking up. Rewatch later. I do it almost every single time because I'm on my laptop and then I have a webcam behind it. And then when I go to move around the mouse, I have an external mouse. I don't like it. And that is what happens. And I need to have a meeting with StreamYard, but they don't need to meet with me because I'm not a big enough channel. Thank you, Cynthia, so much for the Cash App. You guys are very generous. I just see any questions here. And Elizabeth, thank you for the Venmo. You guys are very, very super generous on this case. And I really appreciate it because not only do I have more than 50 hours on this case, maybe we're up to 60 by now, but there's a lot of behind the scenes work that goes into it too. I don't just come on here and make things up like some people say. Elizabeth says, extraordinary content as usual and great mods too. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And Cynthia, thank you so much. And Christy says, for all the Twitter trolls, thank you, Christy, for thinking of me. And Nancy, so grateful for all your expertise. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you so much. And Justin, thank you so much. And, you guys are awesome. Let me go to the chat and see if there's any questions. Just put some question marks or something in front of your questions because it does not come up. Thank you, Debbie, so much for your super chat. Sandy says, I'm learning who are the best YouTuber and podcasters through Melanie. I never used to watch YouTube. Before I started doing this, I never knew this whole world existed. And some days I wish I didn't after I get attacked like I did last night. If you were on Twitter, I've deleted Twitter. I can't do it. I just can't do it. I tried. I'm like, why should I do this? It aggravates me. There's no reason for me there's nothing should disturb my peace. And that was a really big disruption of my peace. Suzanne, thanks for your super chat. I'm a huge Quincy fan and Dr. Morgan was fantastic. I could listen to for hours. Thank you so much. I used to watch Quincy when I was a kid as well. And I always wanted to be a medical examiner. And I thought to myself, well, I could be a medical examiner and sort of like being a detective. And then also you really can't, you can't kill anybody or mess up because, but I became a lawyer instead. And here I am. Thanks, Claire. I know. I saw you laughing at those tweets last night. I lost control. And then I was like, you know what? I just got to put this away. I'm done. I'm done with this. There's nothing that I need to see on Twitter except breaking news. So maybe I'll make a fake account like everyone else does who goes on there and tries to trash me. It was insane. It was really an S show over there last night. Don't worry, says Oblivious Benson. I love to fight on Twitter too. Oh my God, so funny. So funny. Be cool, says I'm from Boston. I can't even. Yeah, you guys, this is going to be one, I think, of the most interesting trials that we have seen in a very, very long time. And like I said on an earlier stream, this OJ dying thing could not have happened at a better time for the Karen Reed trial because everyone remembers from the OJ trial the allegation that Furman, at least, was planting evidence in that case. So, right, Lucas Knight says, as a medical examiner, none of your clients or patients will ever complain. 100%. 100%. So tomorrow we need to pick 4 more jurors and then they will run their Corey checks on the seated jurors. And then we will start with opening statements. The earliest this could possibly start, I believe, is Tuesday. So Tuesday or Wednesday. And I will be here with you, gavel to gavel. This will be very interesting. Very interesting because it'll be my first gavel to gavel trial. Very exciting. So Brandy and I are going to discuss how we're going to share, split, do whatever we do because it's exhausting. And it's going to be, I'm glad that we can do this together because this is a safe place for you guys to chat. It's an S Show Daily on Twitter. I know, it's just really a cesspool over there, right? Mozzie says, as any law enforcement officer will tell you, being present during autopsies would turn you off that career for life. Yeah, I think you're probably right. And the smell too, just the formaldehyde and just the smell. Yeah, I don't know. Crow Red Eye. Twitter's a dumpster fire, but sometimes I need the warmth. Oh my God, that's so funny. Silver Fox. Melanie, someone said the picture from the Sally port of the taillight showed up. Have you seen this? No, because I quit Twitter. So I guess that would be the only place I've seen it, unless someone has emailed it to me, because you guys are so helpful with your documents and everything. And I know a lot of you have looked. I know a lot of you have sent me emails that wanting to volunteer to moderate for this gavel to gavel situation. I still have not had a chance to look at them yet, so don't think I'm ignoring you. Biscuits is so ready for this trial. Brown Eyes is like, great show. Thanks for your great coverage. Claire said, I didn't realize you deleted your Twitter. That's a bummer. Yeah, this morning I woke up and I'm like, it is such a time suck. Really, it is such a time suck. And there's nothing on there that's going to make you feel good. So like, I'm too old to like feel miserable. I would rather just live in peace and have some zen and, do some yoga and not allow people to personally attack me. That was a mess what happened last night. It was an absolute mess. I couldn't believe it. And I have been so kind and so classy to never speak about that woman and never mention her name and ask all of you not to trash her personally. But when somebody comes after me personally and starts trashing me and starts attacking my credibility and publicly stating that the only reason I'm handling the Karen Reed case is for money and that I know nothing about the facts because I'm only a personal injury lawyer, that's yeah, it was a desperate attention suck. So, yes, I'm a civil litigator. I've never been a criminal lawyer. I never said I was. I've not only sued the Catholic Church on behalf of 50 or 60 victims of clergy sex abuse. I've represented women in sexual harassment claims and all kinds of abuse claims, also handling car accidents, 9/11 cases, plane crashes, train crashes, mass casualties. So, if you're going to go there and you're going to say that an attorney who's on LawTube, which is what they apparently call this, who only has a civil litigation background, is not allowed to discuss criminal cases because they have no credibility, you need to get out there, number one, and tell everyone how many murder scenes you've investigated, because we know the answer to that. And you also need to go tell Peter Tragos, the lawyer who happens to be a very good personal injury lawyer, that he has no business talking about criminal cases. So there's that. I don't even want to waste my breath on it because it's just, yeah, it's just like, okay, so this person started a YouTube channel and now you're going to come and attack me? Okay. Okay. You can find it if you are, yes, Jackie. Yes, Jack. Yes, exactly. So, I'm not even gonna dignify it with even any more of my breath, because I did call her out. I did call her out last night on Twitter. But then I deleted it this morning because I don't have time for it. I just don't have time for it. I have teenagers. I have enough drama in my house. No, yeah, I know, Lise, it's not okay. It is not okay. And thanks to all of you who got out there and defended me. And I really do appreciate that. There's another person called Thunder Muffin or something. There's a bunch of people, and you know who they are. You probably even know their real names. You know who they are. But I'm done with it. I'm done. Oh yeah, Turtle Truth Seeker says you're obviously getting under their skin. That's why they're coming for you. You talk sense and they know it. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jay, for loving me. I love all of you so much too. I do. I love you all for watching. I love you all for coming in here and being kind and being classy and keeping the chat nice and loving each other and finding this a nice, warm place to be. And, I can't thank you enough, because without you guys, I would not have a channel. So I think tomorrow, since we're still in jury selection, we still might have a couple more things to cover. Just drop it in the comments if there's anything more on Karen Reed you want to cover before this trial starts. Oh, there's that. Biff. Okay. And let me know. Yeah, I'm done with the drama part 2. Sparkle. I know. It makes me angry too. That's why I'm not stopping it. I'm stopping. Thank you. All right. Thanks, moderators. You guys are amazing for keeping the chat classy and letting everybody come and say what they want to say and share their thoughts, and for welcoming everyone. And thank you, Peter Pranzo and Patronus Glow and Rochella Pranzo. You guys are awesome. You rock, Little Cupcake, Scott Messerschmidt, and anyone else who I am forgetting to shout out right now as such in the moderator. Scott, regular Scott, Scott number 1 and Scott number 2. You guys are amazing. If everyone could hit the like button, that would really be helpful to the algorithm. I don't know. The YouTube has this weird algorithm, and this stream will not get pushed out to the general public who are not subscribed unless we all hit the like button, the subscribe button too. It's free. And then you can hit the bells so you know when I go live. I think there's like 47% of people who watch my channel are not subscribed. So if you would subscribe, that would really help the channel. That's all I'm saying. Thank you so much. You guys are awesome. And I will just remember, be cool, be kind, be classy. It's not hard. I know for some people it is, but for you, I know it is not. Peace out, my friends. I'm sure I'll see you tomorrow. Good night, everyone.